We're here because obviously Chinese President Xi Jinping will be in Washington, D.C. here at the White House next week for his first official state visit as President of China. And he will be hosted and he will be feted and honored at a time when he is overseeing one of the worst crackdowns on rights and on freedom inside China, in Tibet, and in East Turkestan. And we are here today to call on President Obama to remind him that this is happening, that the U.S. can't turn away, can't look away, that the U.S. and President Obama has to say something publicly to call on Xi Jinping to halt the crackdown in China, in Tibet, and in East Turkestan. And so we have some esteemed speakers and guests and friends here who will speak to this issue. Alim is the head of the Uyghur American Association, and he will speak about the case of the Uyghur people in East Turkestan, also known as Xinjiang, in China.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank all the organizers of the press conference and each and every one of you for coming here today, because this event is happening a week before Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to the White House. And since Xi Jinping became China's president for the last 2.5 years, we have seen an unprecedented crackdown on Uyghurs, Tibetans, Mongolians, and the Chinese people. We have seen the worst case scenario, if you will. When Xi Jinping became China's new president, it's a new wave of heavy-handed repression all over. And it's even by far worse than the period of Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin period. Since the Chinese government's massacre of students in 1989, June 4th, and we're witnessing the worst wave of repression. And in the case of Uyghurs, of course, now Uyghurs are Muslims. China used that as a trump card to repackage its repression and justify its heavy-handed crackdown in our homeland of East Turkestan. Since Xi Jinping became the president, we have documented at least some 800 Uyghurs have been killed by Chinese security forces. And in Tibet, the situation is not getting any better, it's getting worse. Tenzin Dalik died in prison. That's one example of how China is treating Tibetans and Tibetan prisoners of conscience. We have seen China is rounding up hundreds of Chinese lawyers and dissidents and locking them in prison for simply discussing the problems facing by the Chinese people and the rule of law in China. So this is a critical period at the time when Xi Jinping is going to visit the White House. So we would like to urge U.S. President Obama to call on Chinese President Xi Jinping to release Uyghur academic I'm holding, Ilham Tohti. He's a Uyghur professor who was sentenced to prison last year, life sentence last year, for simply trying to bridge the gap between the Chinese people and Uyghur people and to play a moderate role in China. And also to release Chinese Nobel Peace Laureate Liu Xiaobo, and also many prominent Tibetan prisoners, including the young Panchen Lama that was held hostage by the Chinese government since he was very young for the last 10 years. These are crimes against humanity. And Chinese President Xi Jinping doesn't deserve the respect of the Chinese people, Uyghur people, Tibetan people. Neither should be respected by the American people and honored by the White House. And President Obama should make it clear that the improvement of U.S.-China relations should be dependent upon China improving its own human rights record and improving its treatment of the Uyghurs, Tibetans, Mongolians, and the Chinese people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alim.